All right, Beau, shall we get started and let people trickle in?
Let's do it.
All right, I think we're going to have people slowly trickling in as the minutes tick by, but we have about 40 minutes with the group, so maybe we can just start off by saying hello, getting acquainted. Even if it's a small group, I can open up chat for them. I think it would be nice if people can kind of chime into the conversation. I see people rolling in. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm seeing some people I know. Hi, Una. I have a couple of the Jocelyn's that I know. The sound is really bad. Okay. Thank you for the feedback, Linda. Is it better now?
Thanks, Tara.
The sound works great on your end. Okay, great. That's good to know. Thanks, everyone. All right, I think there's going to be a couple people tuning in. I think what I'll do is I might actually open up the chat for all the attendees when we get into a bit more Q&A. But hey, Una. Yeah, Una's tuning in from Germany. Hello.
Good, Tara. Good enough.
Amazing. Okay, so why don't we get started? I'm really excited for this conversation today, and to the people that are joining us from all over the world. I definitely want to give everyone the chance to also participate in the conversation, hence us getting started now. Beau and I have been kind of working together and chatting for the last couple of months. And the reason why I asked him to be on this panel today is because beyond just being an expert when it comes to diversity and inclusion, human capital, I think him and I share a lot of similar values. And so I think his perspective will be helpful for some of the people here, whether you're here just to learn more about D&I or you're an actual diversity, equity, inclusion leader, or maybe you're a people ops leader. I think today's session is meant to be as helpful as possible, and it's meant to give you ideas to go and action right away. I'm not going to take away too much of the thunder from Beau, but I'm going to share my screen just for a moment, just so everyone has something to kind of look at as well. And I'd love to maybe start off with just a couple of introductions, so all of you get a sense of what you're expecting for today. With that, Beau, would love to kind of get your intro and a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation for Ultra, and hopefully we can make it a conversation so that you all get something out of it. So a little bit about me. You can probably tell from my accent. I'm Australian, but I live in Canada now. Have for the last 7 years, and spent a couple of years living in Singapore in between as well. And so I think part of why I'm excited about this conversation and super passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion is, having lived in so many countries and worked in so many countries around the world, I've really garnered an appreciation for the value that D&I can have, both in the workplace, but also for the human experience. At the end of the day, we're all people, and we want to be able to feel valued and feel like we belong and can contribute. And so that's really what I'm excited about. A little bit about me in terms of my career. Started my career in labor relations, moved into HR business partnering roles, then moved into business transformation and M&A integration projects. And then more recently, I've been working with Anthemis, leading transformation there as well, as Chief Operations Officer. So a lot of different stuff there, but many experiences to draw on in terms of this topic. So looking forward to sharing what I can.
Amazing. And for the folks that don't know what Anthemis is, Beau, or just some of the firms that you've worked at, I think that would be also helpful for people to kind of understand the scale of work that you've been doing.
Yeah, sure. So Anthemis, for those that don't know, we're a venture capital firm. We exist to bring about change within the financial system. So we invest largely in embedded finance technology, and we've got over 150 portfolio companies active at the moment. And so we really believe in systems change, and that even though Anthemis, we're only 40 people and we're a small organization, we can have a disproportionate impact through our network and through the investments that we make, the LPs that we have, and the broader ecosystem that we participate in. Besides Anthemis, or before Anthemis, I was with Deloitte as a partner for 4 years, and before that, I've worked across a variety of different industries, everything from global kind of multinational companies like BHP Billiton and mining, through to insurance in Australia, media technology companies, and the like. So diverse industry kind of backgrounds. Helped start an airline in New Zealand, which was one of the fun jobs that I had. So yeah, lots of different experiences to draw from there.
Thank you so much. And I think one thing that I really appreciated from your intro was the last line that I bolded about, believing that everyday human connection is the key for, advancing inclusion, which I think I also 100% align with. I was actually going to do a quick intro and maybe potentially open up the floor to the audience. I'd love to know from some of the folks here if they'd like to put into the chat, even if you put into the chat your role, where you're tuning in from, and what you're hoping to achieve today. I think it always makes it more exciting for people like Beau and I to know who's here. And then maybe at the end, I can actually open up the mics for everyone so people can actually contribute to the conversation. But a quick introduction from my end. I work at Diversio currently, and I'm super passionate about all things related to sustainability, diversity, and equity and inclusion. I firmly believe that the leaders of today and tomorrow can conduct business in a way that's going to create a more sustainable and equitable society for everyone. Maybe that sounds a bit idealistic, but I think the way that we see the world moving as well, we have more studies and more use cases and business cases proving this. So I'm really excited today to learn from Beau, in being able to share what he's seen, but also being able to share how people can start taking action, even in different working conditions, even in different environments. So I'm here, like the rest of you all, to listen and hopefully to facilitate interesting conversation. Use me as your voice if you can't speak up yourself, but I'm looking forward to this. So a quick overview of the agenda that we're hoping to cover. We might not do this perfectly, but we're hoping that we take off at least something from each of these places today. And again, I would encourage everyone who's tuning in to please use the chat and share if there's something you're not seeing that you'd like to hear about. We're going to try to hit all the questions that we can. Talking a little bit about why we're here today. I think we're doing that now, but we'll explicitly hit that a little bit more into how leaders impact diversity and inclusion. We'll be listening to Beau from here. Common challenges that leaders may face when it comes to D&I. Again, a brief overview, because I'm sure a lot of you here already know what these challenges are. And I think the bulk of the conversation that we want to move into is on taking action, is on doing something about this now in your organization, irrespective of where you are. So talking about how can we be outcomes oriented when it comes to tracking D&I, and what actions can be taken sooner rather than later. Are there any helpful frameworks or toolkits out there that all of you can download and or take on your own into your own teams and action right away? So I want to pause here really quickly. I see everyone here chiming into the chat. Hi, Beth from Minnesota. Very interesting. Nice to meet you. Thanks for joining in. Beau, any context here that I might have missed before we kind of
I think that's great. Let's jump into it.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing screen for now. And actually what I think I might do is, what I'm going to do for everyone is I'm going to allow allow all the participants to talk. I think it's just nicer if we can see everyone on the screen, but all of you will be muted and there's no pressure for anyone to chat. I just feel like we're a small enough group. Why not? Beau, I hope that's okay with you. Hi, Lisa. I'm seeing a lot of people that I know from my network on LinkedIn as well. It's very nice to see everyone. Okay, so I think this is going to be fun. And I think doing a webinar this way, in my opinion, is more effective. So I'm keeping everyone here. What I'd ask is while Beau and I are kind of sharing resources, kindly keep yourself on mute. We'll try to pause after each kind of major talking point to get some feedback. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A. So Beau, maybe kick us off. Why are we here today? Talk to us a little bit about why you decided to kind of have this conversation, and let's go from there.
Yeah, sure. So, I think one of my observations within this space generally is that, call it a hot topic right now, if you like, but sometimes I think that all of the conversation that we have around this sometimes gets in the way of actually doing the work. And oftentimes I think people are nervous or unsure about what to do, and so that leads to inaction, or they're trying to get it perfect and don't want to make a misstep, and so don't do anything as a result, or delay action because they're trying to work on getting it perfect. And similar to what you kind of highlighted in my intro, which I really believe that all of this is about human connection at the end of the day. And so each of us every day has an opportunity to help someone else feel and be included. And if we focus on that, the rest will follow. And so hopefully I can share some examples as we kind of get into it around some things that I've seen done to help bring that about, and think about how that might be applicable to your workplace, because there's no silver bullet to this. It's not a one size fits all solution. We've got to find what works in our environments and our context. But absolutely, we all can take action every day. And if we all do that, then that leads to, it's a bit of a snowball effect, right? The more of us taking daily actions, the more this becomes habit, and we see improvement. This isn't a destination that we're working towards. This is an ongoing process that we have to kind of work on achieving. So that's kind of why I'm excited about this conversation. Is as individuals on a daily basis, we have the ability to bring about change.
Yeah, 100%. I want to actually take a pause and not to put anyone on the spot, but if anyone in the audience does want to share why they decided to tune in today, whether it was your interest in learning about Beau or, your day-to-day role, I'd love to hear. Take a quick pause and see if anyone wants to volunteer as tribute. Chat is also totally fine. Okay, everyone's warming up. No worries. If you do want to share anything, just put your hand up so I can see, and that way I'll flag your profile to the group. Oh, there you go, Beth.
Yeah, that one more extra mute that I missed. So yeah, Beth from Minnesota, and a big part of the reason that I'm here is to try and understand better the complexities that are faced by folks that are doing the DEI work from like an HR level, because I've run into a lot of roadblocks, and I think it would be helpful to kind of get a feel for what's happening outside of my world.
That's helpful. It's a great transition into what we're about to talk about. I think the first question I was gonna ask Beau, and also we'll chime in or even ask the audience if they have a good perspective on, is just as a way to ease into what can be done. As a baseline understanding, I think it's important for everyone in this group to understand how leaders, and arguably everyone in an organization, but especially maybe someone that has a team, or leader is such a vague term. It can be defined as a champion in the organization. You may be an individual contributor, but everyone knows who you are and you have an influence on culture. Beau, maybe starting off there, what is the role of this person when it comes to influencing diversity, equity, inclusion, and maybe just like human experience overall?
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, the point I made earlier around it's the everyday behaviors. As a leader, whether you're a leader by title or informally within any context, whether it's work or social clubs you're part of or whatever it may be, people look to you as an example. So they will see what you're doing and they will respond and react to that. And so I think the number one thing that leaders can do is be conscious of their own behaviors, how they're presenting themselves, how they're actively trying to include others individually and collectively. And I think that is first and foremost. So one of the things that I, just burned into my memory, I'm not sure if anyone on the phone has seen this research, but Dr. Juliet Burke out of Australia has done a lot of research around what she calls the everyday traits of leaders. So there's 6 everyday traits that through her global research, her and her team have found that lead to leaders being inclusive or perceived as inclusive. And one of the key pieces from that research, aside from what those 6 traits are, is actually the finding that 70% of an individual's sense of inclusion in the workplace is as a result of their leaders' behavior. So just let that sink in, 70%. So it's not about the programs that the employer has in place. It's not about the policies. It's not about the benefits that someone provides. 70% of an individual sense of inclusion in the workplace stems from their leader. So when you look at it through that lens, understanding the powerful impact that you can have as a leader on someone's sense of inclusion is really key to thinking, okay, so what can I do about this? Yes, I need to look at the systemic things and make sure that our policies are inclusive and all those types of things. But at the end of the day, if just looking at this on the proportions, if 70% of someone's feeling of inclusion comes from how I engage with them and interact with them, then that's probably where I need to be putting my effort to bring about that improved inclusion within the workplace. And coming back to the earlier point I made around people looking to you for an example, your peers are going to be doing the same. So they see you doing those things, they'll start to, whether consciously or unconsciously, learn from that and that type of thing. So I think that's just one kind of powerful thing in terms of what can leaders do.
Yeah.
Let that sink in around like your everyday kind of actions, behaviors, etc., and how much of an impact that can actually have beyond the systemic things, which are also important. I'm not saying they're not, but in terms of being impactful for our teams, it's absolutely our everyday behavior.
Thank you so much. And hi, Sarah. Thank you for introducing yourself. I'm just reading what you're talking about. Super eager to learn more about and adding to your office. Well, congratulations on the new New York office. And yes, I'm hoping that you walk away from here with some new things that you can add in. So anything that Beau talks about that might be helpful resources, by the way, I'm putting into the chat, and also we'll try our best to follow up. And just to quickly chime on, for folks that might be potentially writing notes or adding in ideas from a diversity lens, and maybe even a more tactical way, just a couple of examples of how leaders through their individual behaviors could affect that. Like how does that actually manifest in I guess diversity as methodology? What we find is that there's different aspects of inclusion in your day-to-day life at work. There's these individual behaviors that Beau is talking about that come with you the moment you walk into the office to the moment that you leave, and even after offline when you're talking to your colleagues. But then it also manifests in things like how you are, running a meeting. And if you're noticing people who are not, participating in the discussion, are you as a leader noticing those quiet voices that are maybe disengaged? Are you bringing forth their opinions to the front and making them feel comfortable? It's about, providing feedback, whether that's informal or formal feedback, and ensuring you're doing it in inclusive ways. Other ways that leaders also have a huge influence, I think, is in the meeting rooms when they're with senior leadership, where there may be less diversity. And I think this is something we see across many industries, across many geographies. It's also about paying attention to, I guess, the voices in your company that may be less included, and ensuring that their perspective is shared in those rooms. And these are just a couple of, I guess, core examples of how I think a leader or someone that has more quote unquote political influence in an organization has that extra opportunity to push forth change. But I think there's a couple of challenges that also people may face. For example, if you're a leader like Beau, or you're, a believer like myself, if you don't have that culture fostered in your organization, there can be some roadblocks getting in the way. So I did also want to ask, and kind of introduce the conversation of what are some of these kind of common challenges that leaders face. This is obviously might be like a trick question, but I think it's important to acknowledge the elephant in the room, that it's not always easy to drive forth change, or even if you're adopting behaviors, to see this kind of huge impact, and talking about how we can solve for that. So maybe Beau, hopefully not asking you to be repeated voice, but I would love to hear your take on if you've experienced any of these yourself, if you would add anything else to the list, and what kind of common problems the audience should kind of be aware of that they might, need to tackle and continue to tackle as they're introducing more robust, D&I action into their workforce.
Yeah, of course. So, I think I've seen all of these in different permutations in different organizations. So I think all of the above would be my answer here for sure. I think one of the other common ones that I hear and see when I'm talking with organizations is in the other category, which is we don't have budget for it.
Yes.
And I have a visceral reaction to those types of comments because to me and my kind of philosophical view of the world is you don't need budget to do D&I because D&I is how you do everything that you do. It's not an extra thing that you have to do.
Right.
And so, you know, to give an example from Anthemis, a conversation that we're having internally at the moment is around how we can better track data collection for our portfolio companies to get a sense of the impact that we're having for the communities and within the financial system that we're trying to have. And so the conversation around that is, well, so how do we fund the data collection? Like, we don't have a DEI budget. It's like, yeah, we deliberately don't have a DEI budget because that's actually about portfolio risk management. And if we're trying to understand what is the risk within our portfolio because our companies either are or aren't having the intended impact, then how do we fund that through the portfolio risk management or the portfolio management budget versus a DEI budget? And so just shifting the conversation around, so what's the problem we're trying to solve here, and how can we weave DE&I into that conversation as opposed to D&I being a separate conversation. I think it's often a trap that I see some people falling into is thinking about D&I separately rather than thinking about it as integrated into everything that we do.
One question I have for you that maybe some people in the audience might be thinking is, okay, cool. I understand that. I can start taking action. It can even be close to free, if not free. But let's just say from a leadership top-down perspective, their leaders are looking at D&I as a separate initiative. Therefore, and I see this all the time, you know, companies having head of D&I or a D&I team that's kind of isolated and they have to, you know, work in these cross-functional roles, trying to get buy-in from different parts of the organization. Do you have a perspective there on how champions can push their leadership to, you know, better integrate, I guess, D&I with the rest of the organization? And I think we're starting to move into the conversation of being outcomes oriented and some of the tips you gave, but
yeah,
hoping
yeah,
it's
I mean, I love to give practical kind of things, and I like the suggestions that you were talking about before in terms of asking people for contributions in meetings and being inclusive in that way. Another kind of thing on this topic around, if you know, maybe you're struggling to get influence, I think this comes down to one of the everyday behaviors of leaders, which is demonstrating commitment and demonstrating courage. And so, but in and around commitment, it's why are you doing this? Are you doing D&I because you think you have to, because you think it's the right thing to do, or because you have a fundamental belief that it actually is a win-win-win for the individuals, for the whether it's customers, people, whatever, or for the business outcome, for the community at large, whatever it is. How can you demonstrate your commitment via that? And so I think that really ties into the point around, if you're doing D&I because you need to check the box, then you probably are lacking on the commitment side of things. And so how do you shift that conversation to be really around, you know, what's the impact that we can have by being better at how we think about D&I in the organization? And so if I think about an example from Deloitte, another practical thing, like if you think about in a consulting environment, you're always assembling teams to deal with a new client challenge, right? And how you assemble that team and who you put on that team is critically important for a couple of reasons. One, you need to have the experience to be able to solve the problem for the client. So you need to have the right skill set on the team. But if you think about diversity and its power in terms of bringing different perspectives to solving that problem, if you have a homogenous team that's all thinking the same way, then you're probably not going to get the best solution for the client, and they're going to be underwhelmed, or they're not going to pay for the work, or it's not actually going to solve the problem. And so if you think about this from a commercial perspective and trying to influence maybe a leader who doesn't want to put someone on a team for a certain reason, then how can you leverage other ways to, or other logic to say, well, you know, putting X on this team will help us because this is the perspective they bring. And I heard the client is really looking for Y, and that's helpful to solve that problem. So how do you make those connections between the value that somebody brings with their different perspective and what is the problem that you're trying to solve? So I think that's really one of the things that ties into that kind of outcomes orientation is be clear on why you're doing it. And that can be in the everyday kind of bit and just demonstrating your commitment, but it's also in terms of finding those ways that DEI can be impactful from different angles. I think the other piece is, and I mentioned courage a little while ago, this one is really about speaking up at the right time. So if you have a leader or a peer, a colleague, an upper leader, someone else in the business that you see or hear that is, you know, not doing the right thing, then having the courage to actually call them out on that. Doesn't have to be in public, it can be in private, but taking the stand and helping them to understand why what they're doing isn't okay. And this can be, you know, really simple things like the language that we use, and, you know, just following up with them after a meeting and saying, hey, I heard you refer to so-and-so as this in the meeting, you know, that, you know, can cause offense to some people, and, you know, we should probably be talking about it this way instead, and helping that. So that's really, again, an everyday behavior where you can help to shape and influence other leaders in your organization through commitment and through courage.
Okay, amazing. That's super helpful. And I think just as like a recap for the audience, we'll be sharing this, but Beau actually shared some helpful resources with me prior to us, you know, putting this session together. And I think one of the things that I really like that I think everyone can take away is how can you be outcomes oriented in order to solve for some of these challenges over here? I think, for example, let's talk about inaction. I see this all the time. You know, people get, you know, stuck on, we don't have a budget, we have to get a budget, you know, and a lot of times organizations will like just move in circles trying to figure out where budget is coming from if they don't have a D&I budget. And what ends up happening is no action is being taken. I think B is also a big one, because if you have a majority of your organization not even aware of their own bias or aware of how they might be contributing to the inclusion challenge, there's probably an education gap here. And like Beau said, you can have the courage to start calling it out, but at the same time, if you're the only champion in the organization, I can tell how it can get exhausting to do that. So I think this is why we talked about being outcomes oriented. And I think, Beau, what you mentioned to me really stood out, which is set explicit goals if possible, at least internally. But here's the secret. They don't have to be these perfect goals. They're meant to be directional. That's what I liked about what Beau shared with me. And an example of this might be, you know, a lot of organizations often feel pressure to maybe set diversity targets for leadership. I see this a lot of times when having conversations at Diversio. But I actually think what's more important here is to talk about, like, can we over time see an improvement, or can we over time see that we're taking the actions needed to fill that gap? You know, if as an organization, you're trying your best to introduce inclusive, say, recruitment practices, even the free ones or things that are quite simple. If each year you're making meaningful progress to that goal, I think that's more important than having the perfect goal. And, you know, if you're coming from a small to mid-sized organization, I also don't think that you're going to have the perfect goal in place, because who knows what's going to happen, whether you're going to have a pandemic you're facing or rapid growth you're facing. It's often hard to align everything perfectly. But I think the second one is even more important. Maybe, Beau, this is where I'll like pass off the mic to you and giving some explicit examples of how people can do this. But connecting your D&I goals to your business's purpose is what I think starts bringing more leaders together, whether or not they're mature in the D&I conversation or not. Because if they understand how achieving the D&I directional goals can improve their business, it's often a much easier conversation beyond just saying, you know, it's the right thing to do and it's not that hard to do it. But I want to pause here. Beau, any thoughts on, you know, examples of how you've seen this done in your world, or just great examples you've seen done in the industry on how, you know, people can start to connect these directional goals back to the business so that they can start taking action?
Yeah, absolutely. And I reflect on the conversation we had a few weeks back, which are just around, I think a lot of times what's easy to measure isn't actually important to measure.
Yeah.
And so the things like, what percentage of our workforce is female, what percentage of our workforce identifies as a certain race. Those things are useful and important to know, but any point in time data is meaningless out of context. And additionally, even if you were to say 100% of our workforce is female, great achievement, but so what? What does that enable you to do? And this is really that kind of second point around connecting your goals to your business purpose. And so again, to try and bring this to life, if we think about Anthemis's purpose, which is to cultivate change in the financial system, we have a belief that there's a lot of concentration of wealth. None of this would be a surprise to you, but if you think about the way that venture capital firms typically operate, they reinforce and perpetuate that wealth concentration. And so if we think about making the financial system more resilient, improving access to capital, being more transparent, those types of outcomes or impacts that we're trying to have as an organization, how does having greater diversity, not only within our team, but within the portfolio companies that we invest in, how does that help us to achieve that impact that we're trying to have in the world? And so that's really how we kind of think about, and we're certainly not perfect at this either. Like, no one is, let's be honest, because this is an ever evolving thing. But we kind of, yes, we use in certain forums those measures around, 48% of our founders are female or identify as BIPOC, and so contrast that to the rest of the venture capital community. That's phenomenal. Like, a lot of them are in single digits in other firms. But that's not the outcome in of itself. Just giving money to those founders isn't why we exist.
Yeah.
We're giving them money to bring about change in the financial system through the company that they're building. And so how do we enable that impact, not just ending at the handoff of the investment to the founder? And so I think that's really what I'm talking about when you talk about why does your business exist? What's its purpose? What are you trying to achieve? And how does diversity help you, and inclusion help you achieve that? So that's kind of where I'd go with that. I'm just trying to think of another example in terms of a different type of business, but
there's a good example that I once heard from someone working in Google Ads. And by the way, I actually think one point that we're hitting that's not on the page, but I think it's a good takeaway for the audience, is if you're not in a position to 100% like influence change right away, or maybe, you just don't feel like your courage alone is, you don't want to be the lone wolf in the organization pushing this. I think this is where case studies is really, really helpful. And it's case studies specifically kind of focusing on what we're talking about here on this point of connecting D&I goals to business. So what I'd encourage people to do is, you can go onto Diversity's website. We have a couple of great case studies there, but even beyond our own case studies with our clients, there are some good, I think D&I case studies that exist. You might have to do a bit of digging. I know Harvard Business and Harvard in general is a really great resource for a lot of pioneering D&I concepts. But the one that I wanted to talk about before maybe opening up, just the audience to some conversation is Google Ads. They realized that having more diverse individuals contributing to the actual copy and the actual ads that they're running resulted in having just a more I guess explicit diversity seen in these ads, whether it's things that you can hear or things you can see or both. And as a result, they actually noticed a couple of months to years down the line that their sales were coming in from a more broader, diverse set of people. And so I think this is how we start to see, and this is a really explicit, easy example of how a more diverse team resulted in a more diverse ad or set of ads being launched. And as a result, the snowball effect of this, down the line was actual sales being increased because you're now, appealing to a more diverse set of customers. And that's a really nice, perfect example. It may not be as clear for your business, but I think these case studies have a lot of like powerful meaning in the sense that they show us that there can be good impact that ties into business objectives. It may not be like the perfect impact or the more perfect kind of KPI that's tracked and improved and tied back to dollars, but there is meaningful change that you can convince your leaders of if they're not in the room right now.
Yeah. One of the things just on that, if I can share a little bit about decision making at Anthemis, and one of the things that we do in terms of our decision making framework, or two things actually. So one, we have this thing called, we call them collab groups. One of our values is actually called collaboratarian, which is where we invite people to be collaboratively contrarians, and to challenge the status quo and to challenge each other in a collaborative way. And so we formed this concept called a collab group, which is a self-forming group. It's not driven by leadership. It's driven by people that want to come together to solve a common problem. The group forms for that, to solve that problem. And they self-govern, and then they disband once they feel they've served their purpose. And so that's something that we, as a leadership team, enable. We allow our people to form these collaboration groups or collab groups, and to solve those problems. There'll be certain things that they may have to seek approval from in terms of if they wanted to change a compliance policy as a result of something that they're trying to do, they need to get the authorization of the compliance leader to do that. But then that sits alongside our decision-making framework, our IDM process, iterative decision-making, where we try and empower decisions as close to the work as possible. And so one of our other values is called safe to try. And so the concept behind that is that essentially, if you're wanting to implement or introduce a change within the business, you really have to demonstrate that A, it takes the business forward and it doesn't cause any irreversible risk if it was to go wrong.
Yeah.
And so if it's deemed safe to try because you can answer both of those questions, get on and do it, give it a try, and then we learn from it. If it works, we scale it. If it doesn't, we learn from it and try something else. And so that kind of decision-making process around not having so many layers of approvals and decision-making helps to speed things up and to get things done, but also empowers the team to take on their own voice and agency in making the business better, making their lives better, making an outcome for a client better. And so I think don't underestimate, whilst coming back to the kind of we don't have budget kind of thing, or we don't know how to do this, like just think about like simple daily things that you could implement that might allow the contributions of different voices to solving problems within your business and that type of thing. You don't have to have formal things in place all the time. Another example that I quite often hear when I'm talking to like product leaders, so product managers and product directors and that type of stuff, is the importance of getting diverse feedback from your customers. So even if you're targeting a really niche customer group with your business, there's still variance between those customers, and understanding the kind of the different outliers within your customer group and having a better understanding of that enables you to solve that problem differently. So again, you don't need budget to do this. You're already seeking product feedback from your customers. How do you make sure that that product feedback is representative of all of your different customers or potential customers that you might be wanting to include? Because if you can solve for those outliers, you can solve for the majority anyway. So simple day-to-day things could just be having one more voice in the product feedback process, or one more voice in the product design process. And it's a simple thing that a leader can do within their control, because they already have ownership of the product feedback process. That's entirely possible to take action today, and it might lead to a new insight that you otherwise wouldn't have got.
Awesome. I'm going to flash my screen and also just walk through a couple of different things that we talked about in advance. And then I'd love to open up the floor to more conversation. So these are a couple of things that I think we've put together. This is not exhaustive, of course, but I think on the left, I really did appreciate, Beau, your call out of Dr. Burke's 6 signature traits of inclusive leadership. This is something I think and everyone here can at least read through and share with their leadership team. I think it's one of those things where, in my opinion, I would leverage this as a way to start the conversation if your company is very early stage on D&I, or just use it as a way to reinforce that, action can be taken now. And
Mm.
a huge point of impact is just everyday behaviors, which is what you're drilling into our heads and something that I'm walking away with.
Yeah.
I think the other
on that,
please go ahead.
an example of, again, how could you put this into action? Yes, read it yourself and try and understand it. What are those everyday traits? But curate a conversation with your team about it. How can we bring these to life today? And this is something that we were doing at Deloitte with our inclusive leadership program, was we would bring together groups of leaders, diverse leaders from different parts of the business, and we would go through the research with them, help them understand it, and then have a conversation, because we can all learn from each other on this. Again, no one's perfect on any of this, but that sharing of ideas and practical tips and building that sense of community that we are in this together, and that if we all work on this every day, that we'll collectively get better. So raising the waterline for everyone. This is again, something simple you can do just in, whether you do it in one of your existing team meetings, whether you set up a lunch and learn for it, or whatever. All of these things are things within your power as a leader to initiate a conversation about.
Yeah. And then the other one that I also put down here that this is a subjective, but there's oftentimes like free, simple policies or programs that you can just introduce. And even if it doesn't work out, I think it's still a great learning opportunity to see how your employees respond. Examples is just, you just gave one on like how at Anthemis, there's collaboration groups that have been allowed to form from a grassroots perspective. But other examples that I also have come to mind are things like simple policies on flexible work, for example. These are often things that, whether you want to go onto Diversio's website and chat with one of our team members, we can get you started in a simple way, or just go off of what you find through your research. There is a lot of these type of more simple programs and policies that often you can find just by doing a bit of research. And even if you have a list of like 3 or 4 programs and policies that your organization doesn't have, even by introducing that and ensuring that it's communicated well, your employees will feel like there is some action being taken to build a more inclusive organization. And I think people underestimate the value of trying versus not doing anything. And so that I'll put that there. And the other two that I think, just from my experience at Diversio, for maybe companies that are a bit more ahead and want to like take this to the next level, there are lots of great platforms and solutions out there that help you do some of the things Beau and I talked about. If you're lacking of resources, or you just want to have a more robust way of tracking and implementing programs out there like Diversio. And I think a big one that can make a huge, I think, accelerated impact is ensuring your leaders are educated or trained on D&I, whether you do that through a simple conversation as Beau suggested, or like leveraging a partner. I think that's very important because it is a collaborative effort, in my opinion. I think it's a collaborative effort of leaders and all the employees. Culture change doesn't happen with just a subset of employees. So ensuring that everyone's at a baseline level of understanding of, yes, inclusion is important. Yes, bias does exist. Here's how it can manifest in my workforce. And being aware of that is huge in terms of how it can impact people. I saw you nodding, Beau, but I don't know if you have any other things that like might be a totally separate bucket that we want to kind of highlight on what actions people can take today.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the data piece and data collection, and I absolutely believe that data is really critical to this, not just quantitative data, but the qualitative data. And so again, simple tweaks that you can do regardless of kind of what platform you're using. So if you use like an engagement survey, or you're just going with something simpler like an NPS or an inclusion survey, that kind of thing, how could you just add one new or different question that can give you a different perspective or a different insight? And so I think you said before, which what's important is trends over time, and so you don't want to take any one point in time as the absolute, because the trends are important, but certainly just rethinking on an ongoing basis, like what would be helpful to know now? So as you try these things, how can you measure impact of those things? So you could focus around, do people feel safe to speak up? Or you could focus around, do people feel they have the flexibility to, balance their work and life or manage their work and life commitments? Or you could look at, and so some surveys will already have all of these things in them, but some don't. So depending on what you're already doing in your organization, this might be just updating some questions. It could be adding some new questions. But I think always be thinking about, particularly where you've been doing these things for a while, like these things get a bit stale and old. And so you have to keep them fresh and update them to get new and different perspectives in all the time. And so like in and around our engagement survey that we run at Anthemis, we spend a lot of time diving into the feedback that we get in those in the comments section. So not just the score. The scores, again, it's a directional kind of feedback, but what's really important is the comments and really understanding those and what can we do about them. So I think, don't be afraid to ask the questions. Give it a try and see how you go. And I think if you can demonstrate to your employees that you're responding, you're listening, you're actioning, then they'll start to come to you with more things. That and maybe even in some cases I've seen want to be involved then in bringing about more positive change in the organisation. So I think that empowerment piece is really important to make the individuals feel like they have a voice.
Yeah, those are all bang on. I recognize we have about 10 minutes left, and given that we don't have as big of a group, I'm hoping that people feel comfortable just to raise their hand and share any questions and unmute themselves, but you can also put it into the chat. One of the comments that we got from Beth was sometimes people in her organization, or I'm assuming that's what you mean, are feeling excluded who have disabilities. And I think one thing you commented on is actually a really good point, which is that maybe the broader consensus of leaders in your organization are overlooking how being told not to read. You said we're taught to never read what is on our slides and presenting. However, people who are blind or have low vision may be missing important content. So I actually think there's like a underlying question there. And Beth, feel free to like unmute yourself and clarify. But I think there's a good point here, which is sometimes people notice and sometimes people adopt inclusive behaviors, but potentially others may not, or there's like a policy baked in that doesn't. Is there a way to go about solving this in a way that, makes meaningful change? Beau, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I can give some thoughts unless Beth wants to come off mute.
Yeah, Beth, I see you coming off mute.
Yeah, I'm here. So part of my job as an accessibility analyst is to help organizations understand where their websites and applications are not accessible for people with disabilities, and it can be a wide range of disability types. I work with a wide range of people with disabilities, but the other thing is there are a lot of people with hidden disabilities. You would not know necessarily that something can be jarring for them, for example. So trying to make sure that you are presenting content, if you're doing a presentation, if it's on your slide, it needs to be communicated. If there's a quote that you think is important, read the whole quote. Things like that, where you're making sure that not only people who are blind or low vision get the content, but also people who maybe have dialed into the webinar but are not watching it might also be missing out. So it's stuff like that. We are working very hard with our leadership team to help them recognize more of these things. But it's just one of those groups where I was kind of hoping to influence the broader audience here to try and remember that there are people with disabilities that really could use our help to make them feel included.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Beth. I do think people with disabilities are often an overlooked demographic within the workplace, and we tend to, at least HR professionals tend to look at accommodation needs very specifically through recruitment processes and onboarding, but then it's forgotten about after that. And I think one of the other easy next steps that, again, leaders can take on this stuff is, as you build relationship with your team members and understand what their needs are, how do you help those needs be met? And so a practical example that I can think of was a team member that was hired that had a hearing impairment, and we got him some a special computer and some screen reader technology that helped him. But one of the most impactful things was similar to what you're talking about, was for when we're having team meetings and he was having calls with his colleagues, was actually informing them and educating the team about the closed captioning functionality that we have available to us already in Zoom, and switching it on during those calls for him. And so that he could participate. And that was that solution was worked up in conjunction with him. He said, this would be most helpful to me. So we then had the conversation around that, so that we're meeting his need beyond just getting him into the role, but at the same time educating the team so that they're more cognizant of that in other meetings they might be having where that team member wasn't present, whether it could be with portfolio companies and that kind of stuff, and not just assuming that everyone is like them. Another place where I see this play out quite often is with language, particularly in global businesses where we're working across boundaries, and the default position that we tend to assume that English is just the given, and acknowledging that sometimes there's people on the calls where English isn't their first language, or they're not as comfortable with English as everyone else. And so maybe we need to slow down a bit, or allow more time to consider questions before seeking answers, and different things like that. Maybe using some translation software that you can, again, be built into things like Zoom or Google Meet and that type of thing, to help them participate more fully in those conversations. So yeah, another simple example there around language that can be a barrier to people's contributions.
And captions are really helpful for that as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beau. Any questions from the audience? Anything that people would love to, get Beau's perspective on? Anything you're dealing with in your day-to-day we can help with? We have about 5 minutes left. If not, I'm going to just quickly rummage through the chat and see what people have shared. Okay, well, I mean, I think Sarah Saul from Leapsome, you talked about wanting to integrate more D&I tools. I guess this is a nice way to just talk a little bit about what Diversio does. I don't know how many people on the call know about us, but we are definitely a D&I, I'd say, platform and a set of experts that help organizations in many different ways. I would say the best way to learn more about what we do is to add me on LinkedIn, and then I'll also share into the chat. If anyone is looking for a good, unconscious bias training, what we're doing now is, if you'd like to see a demo of the platform, you automatically get a free unconscious bias training. And I've actually taken it, and I think it's a great starting point for folks. So I'm just going to flash the screen over here. But in the meantime, let me look into the chat, because I think people are. Angel here, thank you so much for the presentation. I learned so much on actionable items as an individual. Thanks, Angel, for your comment. I'm gonna flash the page on actionable things that you can do one more time. I think this is a good one if anyone wants to take it away. Any other questions from the group? Yeah, please do connect with us. If not, happy to give 5 minutes back to everyone. All right. I'm sensing silence is good, and we have some people dropping off. So in that case, thank you so much, Beau, for joining and sharing your thoughts. I always learn a lot when I speak with you, and it's nice to see that leaders like you exist. Yeah, for everyone else, please, reach out if we can help. And thank you so much for listening and for the time. It does not go unnoticed.
I'm happy to connect if anyone wants to. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Take care.